Hi class, so I hope I am audible and the screen is visible. So let us start for today again. This is chat. Okay, so yesterday we were seeing what are functions in C, and we will continue with C only and the functions. So we will just see a brief what we saw yesterday. So let me just place a command here. So don't worry about this command. This command basically will clear this output before every execution, right? So that's it. So just forget this basically. So yesterday we saw functions. So why do we require functions? First of all, to make the code more modular and more in a blockwise fashion so that someone who is reading your code understands the code easily. So for example, here is a multiply function. So a function is defined using the round parenthesis. So that is how you identify a function. And you can see here in this multiply function, I am just multiplying two numbers and returning the values, right? So this is the function declaration. This is the function declaration that we do. So we just have the same name as multiply. And if we are passing two parameters, we need to define what is the data type of those two parameters, right? So this we were actually seeing an example yesterday. So let me just replace this using an int and replace all. And when you call a function, you just hide the name of the function. And when you're returning something, you need to specify the return type. And when you're returning something from a function, you need to see, because when a function returns something, it returns to the place where it was called. So function was called at this place. So we need to catch whatever was the result in a particular variable, which is the result in our case, right? So this is how it is. Now we will see a second function. Here what is happening? We are Okay, now we are having multiple functions here, right? So you can see in this particular case, we have three functions: a cube function that takes one parameter, a square function that takes two parameters, and add two function that again takes a single parameter, right? So let us see from the start. Yeah. Acha, why do we define functions after the closing bracket of int main, right? That is your question. Yeah, after return 0, we close this brace, right? See, this is the question, right? Why you put a square brace here? Okay. You tell me the line numbers in this. Acha, why we are returning? Okay, why you're returning? So not specifically to return 0, but why are you returning something, right? Like for example, return p here. But see, I have not returned anything in this function add to, right? So that I will make you clear. Why are we returning something, right? So in this example, it will automatically get cleared, right? We can adding and multiplying in the previous example. Okay, this was function one multiply. This return 0. After return 0, I am defining the function, right? I can, yeah. So I can also define it in this fashion. Okay. So now, okay. So the thing is, see, as I told, main is also a function, right? Now there are few things in which it is a C syntax, right? It's more like you assume that after every English sentence that you write, you have to put a full stop. That signifies the end of a function. Okay, so now what is happening here is that when you define int main, the C syntax says that the entire body of the function, whether it is a main or a multiply function, should be enclosed within these brackets, right? It should be enclosed within these brackets. So that is rule number one. So I am enclosing this within the brackets, right? And the rule number two is that, so for example, return 0 I am writing here, But the thing is, how does actually the program come to know whether the function ends or not? So for that, because see, for example, there is a return type known as void. See, integer means after the main function is executed, I will return you an integer value. Just like we saw for multiply. We were returning 5 into 3, 15, which is of data type int. So it is also possible that you don't return anything from the function, right? So let me do one thing. Uh, I will just show you an example. Just let me modify this code, right? This was an int multiply function. Okay, let me keep this. Let me define another function here. There is also a return type which is known as void. If you see the English meaning of void, that is empty, right? Empty means nothing, right? So when you have a void return type, that means you cannot return anything, right? So I will have to write here something, printf, just a minute, okay? This is printf, the okay, let me do it subtract. The subtraction of I and j is, right, comma, I minus j, right? And let me keep this name as subtract. So as I said, when you are defining a function, just copy paste this line, paste it here, give a semicolon, okay? And this is a void function, right? So what I will do, I will just copy this line, percent here. Oh, sorry, this will be I minus j, sorry, percent d, this, sorry, I forgot, right? So this will display the value of I minus j, but I'm not displaying actual values of I minus j. I'm just writing a static text, right? So I minus j it will do and display in percent d. This is fine. Yeah. So huh, hmm, no, not necessary. Not, it will store it somewhere. Basically, it will return that value to the place where function was called, right? Again, I will just see. For example, when we did multiply I comma j, right? We passed yesterday 5 and 3. Then 5 and 3 were copied to I and j. I had 5, j had 3. So then I copied this function. I mean, basically, this function computed 5 into 3, right? See, anything that you compute needs to be stored somewhere in the memory, right? Somewhere it was stored, right? So when you did 5 into 3, the function saw that, okay, this is returning something, right? So when it was returning something, it knew that the place where the function was called, right? The place where the function was called, where it was called on line number 22. So the function is very sure that it will have a variable that will help me store this particular value, right? The then you can print f result. Thus we did yesterday. We stored it in result and we printed result. Okay. And yeah, you can do directly. Yeah, we can do directly. But if you are taking the, you will actually get that point clear in the void function, right? We will just see. No, there will be a function call. See, void is irrespective of the function call or anything. Void is basically the return type, right? So, for example, let me go through one of the doubts each. So, the first doubt was basically why do we write a return zero after the end of a function, right? So first, let me clear that doubt. So let's say now I have a subtract function here, right? Subtract I comma j. Now you can see here, I have two functions. Let me just move this function call. Okay, now you can see I have multiply and subtract function. Both of their declarations are almost the same except for one word. Multiply has int and subtract has void, right? As I said, English meaning of void is empty, right? Now let us see how they execute, right? And if you see the definition also, let me just copy this, right? If you see multiply and subtract, this part is common, right? Except for the name, int I, int j is common. In multiply, I am doing I into j, and subtract, I am doing I minus j. Now the only difference here is void and integer, right? Now what does this basically specify? This says that when the function is over, right? So basically when the function executes and reaches line number 38, this guy will return some value which is of type integer. This guy will return a value which is of type integer. Now since I'm writing void, I cannot use return something, right? I cannot say return I minus j, right? So this is not allowed because this becomes a conflict. Conflict in the sense you are saying I won't return anything because you are using a void keyword, but then you are specifying a return statement, right? So these two basically they cannot exist together. Either if you are returning something I minus j, both were int, so either write in this fashion, then it is okay. But if you are writing void, then this line cannot be there. We will just see it will pop up an error when we keep a return type, right? We will just see that, right? Now just see that when you write a subtract function which is of void, and now you see where I'm calling this. When I was calling multiply, I was storing the result of multiply in a variable, right? So let me just get back to the notebook. So again, this is not very tough, it's a easy thing only to realize, but let me come back to our notebook. So this helps us for better visualization. This is okay. So this is our main. So I am calling two functions. One is result is equal to, let me take a next page. So this is main. Here we have result is equal to multiply I comma j, and let me change the pen color, and this is a subtract function I comma j, right? So you can see here, first change that you can see here, there is no variable like result, right? So subtract I'm calling directly, right? And now when I define, so let me use black again for multiply. So when I define black coloring integer multiply int I and int j, I do a return I comma j, right? Now what is the logic here? So when you do I multiplied by j, let's say this was 3 and 5, I got the result as 15. Now it is saying that okay, I need to return 15, right? So this int basically tells the compiler that this function upon when it gets exited, it will basically do return a value which is integer, right? Which is an integer, and this integer where it will store, see when the function basically executes, right? When the function basically executes, assume this is your RAM, right? Initially everything executes in the RAM, right? So somewhere in the RAM temporarily, right? Temporarily this 15 will be stored, right? Somewhere in the RAM this 15 will be temporarily stored. The moment I return this function, right, it will go back to the place it was called. So where was the function called? It will go back to this particular place, right? When it goes to this place, it basically replaces this multiply function call with the value. Now in the memory, there will be a variable for result, which is, so this was some temporary box, right? And once the function executes, right, once basically the function reaches this curly braces, what happens? The compiler basically deletes this from the memory also. So this value will no longer be available because it is returned to the place where the function was called, right? Now just check, just a second, just wait. Okay, so now we will see what happens in a subtract function. So subtract was with blue color. So now I am saying void subtract int I int j. I cannot return anything, so I am just doing a printf subtraction percent d I minus j, right? So now you can see the compiler knows that this will return nothing, right? Since it is returning nothing, you need not even store the variable, right? Just like we stored the result in integer, because this was returning an integer, so we had to use a variable to store the returned value, right? We had to use a variable to store the returned value. In this case, because it is a void function, it cannot return anything. Since it cannot return anything, you need not even store anything. You can directly call this. So you will see there are no return, etc., etc. statement. We will see that the function will pop an error when you use a return in the void statement, right? So let us be back to our VS Code, right? So we were using subtract function, right? Let me just run the code. Okay, there is some error, undefined reference to add function. Acha, I used this function but didn't define add. Okay, I am calling also this function. Okay, please enter two numbers to multiply. Let's say 5 and 2, right? Okay, the subtraction of I and j is 3 and the result of multiplication is 10. Okay, let me just see this, why it came. Subtraction should have come afterwards. Why did it? Let me just check, guys. So it may be due to some compiler issues. It should not happen because the functions which are called first are executed first. Oh, acha, I get the point. Sorry. I will tell you why it came. The code is correct only. So let's say I'm entering 5 and 6. The subtraction is -1 and the multiplication is this. 5 and 3, let us keep the same numbers. So subtraction is I and j is 2, so 5 minus 3 is 2 and 5 into 3 is 15. Now we will just see how the code executes. So guys, let us do one thing. It's 11:22. Let us take a break for 4 minutes and then we will be back to the class, right? So let us be back at 11:26. You can put your questions or queries in the chat window, right? So let us have a break for 4 minutes. Just a minute. So declaring the same function twice is not allowed by the compiler, even if you have different data types or same data types. So you cannot have, so I cannot have something like this, right? Even if I have something of this is not allowed basically. Same function names are not allowed. Even if they have a different data type, you see the moment, if you see this multiply showing an error, and if I hover, VS Code says the function, okay, this was the declaration is incompatible with int multiply, right? So basically you cannot define two functions with the same name. Even if, for example, let's say you want to take here three data types. For example, if you want to, let's say, take int of u, let's say, again this is not allowed because you have already defined one function. So this is not at all allowed. Acha, sorry. Yeah. So it was just pause. So for example, you cannot have two functions with the same name. Even if you have different variables, let's say I, j, and z, this is not allowed. The compiler does not allow this. So if a program has, let's say, 1000 functions, all of them should have a unique name, right? One exception is there, which we will see later. There is a thing called default declaration and all, which we will see later, not now. C does not allow function. Yeah, Suryansh, C does not allow function overloading. C++ allows function overloading. A screen was struck because I had paused the recording and the video. Uh, okay, so we were seeing why this result of subtraction of I and j came before this multiply stuff, right? So let me show you on the notebook how this function execution actually happens. So we have result equal to multiply and subtract I comma j, right? So let me just go to the next page. So this is, okay, let me make it pen color black. So you have result is equal to multiply I comma j, and you have subtract I comma j. Guys, just a second, I'm coming back. Okay, so we have subtract I comma j, and let us see how the execution takes place, right? So now we have two function bodies, one for the subtract and one for multiply. So when I write int multiply, int I and int j, I am doing a return I comma j, and then we have a subtract function. Subtract has void int I int j. Here we are doing printf. I am just writing a shorthand, percent %d I comma j, right? Just for simplicity. Now, how does the function execute, right? Let me make another, have a pen color, let's say red. So irrespective whether you define functions above the main or below the main is the function which is always called first, right? Main is the function which is always called first. So main is the function which is always called first. Let me just write it here so that it is easy to view. So main is called first. So main basically comes after execution. Now you can see multiply is the function which is called next. So multiply is called next, right? So what happens the moment multiply is called, then multiply function, basically what happens, the execution of main will pause here. What do I mean by pause here? Pause means now when I am calling the multiply function, the main will actually wait for the multiply function to get executed. So what will happen now? This multiply function will come at this point. So it says, okay, we have our numbers 5 and 3. Then it comes 5 multiplied by 3. Now it says return. So it returns 15. This return will go to the place where the function was called. So eventually what happens? This multiply is replaced by 15. So this 15 is stored into result. See, as of now, 15 is just stored into the result. We are not printing it anywhere. If you see the code also in VS Code, you can see I am just storing the result. but I am actually printing the result here in line number 20. But what I'm doing, I'm calling subtract in line number 17. So let us see what subtract does, right? So result is stored as 15. Now I'm calling subtract, right? So what will subtract do? Let me change the pen color, right? So what will subtract do? Subtract, it will see where it is defined. Okay, it goes to this particular point. Again, while the function is executing, main is paused, right? Main is paused. So subtract I comma j, it is 5 comma 3. So what it will do, percent this here, 5 minus 3 is 2. So in the function itself, right, in the function itself, it will print the value which is 2, right? 2 is printed in the function itself, right? So now 2 is printed in the function itself. I reach the curly braces. Now I think that doubt which he asked is clear, why we are specifying a curly brace after the return, right? See, there is always a possibility that you can return type as void, right? You can always have a function with the return type as void. When you have a function with a return type of void, you cannot have a return statement. Now, since you do not have a return statement, how does the compiler come to know where is the function getting ended, right? Where is the function getting end? So for that, the compiler sees that, okay, this is the closing bracket of this function, and this is the starting bracket of this function. So even if basically there are no return types, I can guess where is the function definition ending based on the curly braces, right? But if you specify something like int multiply, so the function actually knows that return will be the last statement of this function. Even though it is a return statement, they still maintain this syntax of closing every function definition with a curly brace, right? So that is why what happened when you call the subtract function. Subtract function had a print statement which displayed basically the difference, and then after the subtract function got over, we basically returned to this position where subtraction was called. So subtraction is called, and then finally we come across printf, the result of multiplication is result. So see, you got the result in this line only, right? Line number 16, you had got the result, but of course you can print the value anytime that you want. So for example, if you just want a very logical explanation, the moment I get the value of result, I will print the value of result, and then I will call the subtract function. In this case, this output will come above the subtraction. Let us just see it. So when I run the code, let's say 5 and 3. So now you can see the result of multiplication is 50. The subtraction of I and j is 2. Now you can see subtract had a void return type. Now let us try to return something for a function which is defined for void, right? Let us try to execute this statement and let us see what is the error that the compiler throws to us. Okay. Okay, I do not know why it should throw an error, because when you have a void return type, you cannot return anything. So, so this also happens when you have the latest compilers. I hope when I execute this in GCC, it will surely give an error, right? So in the exam, if a quiz question comes, ki whether this part of code will execute, you need to say no, this won't execute, it will throw a error, right? You cannot have a return anything for a void statement. So these are the latest compilers basically that don't throw an error, but this definition is not allowed. You cannot have a return of anything in a function which is returning void, right? So if you just see the definition of void, see, so not valid or not legally, completely empty, right? So it is executing, giving you the proper result, but of course it is not allowed, right? So the latest compilers are allowing. So let me just see if it gives me the GCC version. So GCC version is, in my case, is 6.3.0, right? So probably they must have updated it, but legally, I mean, like from a technical point of view, this should not be allowed. So basically what happens in the latest compilers, what they do, if a function has a void statement, right? They basically ignore the return statement. They just ignore the, even if it is there, because syntactically return is correctly written, right? Syntactically return is correctly written, but they just ignore this statement. And that's it. And let me just try with this thing. GCC numbers and all. GCC minus V. Okay, fine. So I think this is clear. So when the function is called, for example, whenever the function is called, the main is paused for some time until this function does not complete, right? So for example, I will just show you one thing. For example, I will have a for loop in the multiply function, right? So let us have a for loop in the multiply function. Let's say int I is equal to 0 for I is equal to 0, right? I less than equal to 10, and let us write a wrong code. I am doing I minus minus, right? So basically I am defining an empty function body. So what happens? I starts with 0, I will go minus minus, so I will become minus 1, minus 2, minus 3, minus 4. So obviously it will never reach 10, right? Unless it completely wraps around. So just let us see the code. Okay, some issues, I guess I made some mistake. Acha, okay, see, this was a VS Code bug, I think. So you can see, and now I got the a warning here. Return with a value in a function returning void, right? So this was probably a VS Code add-on bug, I think. So now you can see this in the function subtract, return with a value in a function returning void, basically, right? So basically you are trying to return something in a function which is returning void, right? So that is the thing. Okay, int I. Okay, oh sorry, I defined it multiple times. Now I get it. Basically I and j were being used here, right? So we need to define something like k k less than 10 and k minus minus. Okay, so it gave us the warning, enter two numbers to multiply. So now you see when I'm doing 5 and 3, right, it basically, if you see the pause in between, right, if you see the pause, for example, let me just execute the code once again. Let me just comment this line out. I don't know why this WebEx window is popping up again and again. So when I run the code, 5 comma 3, the moment I press enter, just see the pause, right? You can see it is pausing here. Why? Because it is basically computing this particular loop. So what happens? I start from 0 because k is an integer. I go -1, -2, -3, -4, -5 up to the limit of integers 2 raised to 32 in the negative, and then I wrap up to the next set of the next set of positive integers and come back to 10. The point I'm trying to explain here is that whenever you are calling a function, right? Whenever you are calling a function, the main will be paused for that time, right? A better example will be something like this. Let me take a while loop. While k is equal to 0, right? So while k is equal to 0, I am doing nothing, right? So it will come to the multiply loop. K is 0. It will just check whether k is 0. Yeah, it is true, and it will do nothing. Again, it will go the while loop, because while loop runs till it encounters something which is error. So let me just see this one, 5 and 3. So now you can see this function will be paused forever. Why? The main will stop its execution, because what happens when you are calling the multiply function, right? As I said, the main function is paused till the time multiply will complete its execution, right? And now we know that multiply is a infinite loop, So the multiply function never basically completes. Since the multiply function never completes, I cannot proceed beyond this particular point, right? So this is one thing that you need to keep in mind with functions, that while defining functions, keep in mind that your function basically does not get stuck in an infinite loop, or else your main will also cease to execute, right? Just a little concept. For example, now I can just press Control C here to stop the execution, and let me check the chat window. Feels because the program execution starts from main, and while main is running, you cannot. It's not Shailendra Mishra. It's not allowing on my. Yeah, the problem with C compiler is like the latest version. I think GCC is 9, and some people who are using Linux system, by default it is installed as 4. So from 4 to 9, there are so many syntactical things, right? What will happen if we call the main function in above functions that we have made? You can call the main function from everywhere. We will see those things. We will come to recursion also. We can also keep curly braces empty. Yeah, you can. Okay, please explain once again why integers got subtracted first. Dipanshu, is the doubt clear for the subtraction? Because basically you called multiply first, but you are displaying the result of multiplication later on. That is why it was the issue. Suryansh Jaiswal, I could not understand, because program execution starts from main function, and while main function is running, you cannot again call function which is currently running. I could not understand what were you meaning to say here. You can please clarify, right? No, you cannot. I mean, you technically can do that. You can call a main function within the main function, but then it will stuck into the infinite loop. We will see that during the recursion, what happens in that, right? So you are from the main, you are calling main. So the whole of main will be executed. Then the whole of main again will be executed, right? So if you want to see, let me just make a small piece of code for you all. Let's say I keep it main.c, and let me just keep simple printf hi class of 2021, right? This is the main function, and I'm calling a main function from the main function, right? So this basically what will happen, it starts with the main, it will print this line, and I'm calling main. So again it will come here, again print this line. So this goes in an infinite fashion, right? So let me just run the code. You see, nice dancing printfs. So this happens when you call main within the main, or any function from itself, right? So if you want, let me have another execution. It will be one after the one line. See, high class of 21, and it is getting infinite times printed. So basically this kind of concept is at times useful. There is a concept called recursion, which we will see in later classes. So today we had a class only on this. Basically we could just see, okay, when we define multiple functions, what happens and what is the order of execution of calling, right? Now let us see one more function, and then we will end today's class is this one: cube, square of 1, and add 2. So I am defining three functions here, and in the main I am taking an input number, right? So let us see what the definition happens. So whatever the number is, I am adding 2 to that number. Whatever is a function, I am basically, okay, now I am calling another function from a function, right? So again, a good example. So let me just first let us see the output of it, and then we will get an idea. Enter some number for finding square and cube. Let us enter 5, right? The number after adding 2 to it is 7. Square of 5 is 25, and cube of 5 is 125. So you can automatically understand that when I'm entering 5.00, that means it was a float data type, and this is basically just my static printf, hence it is coming as 2. So now let us see how does this happen, right? So for example, every time the main function will be executed, right? the main function executes. So class, let us do one thing. Let us take a break for 3 minutes and we return at 11:50. And this will be the last code that we are executing today. Okay. So just a pause. Anyone has doubt, you can ask during the break. The rest can return at 11:50. It will also go for the infinite one. Let us try function one multiply, right? So you are saying that in the multiply function, yeah, it will be infinite. Yeah, it will be infinite. You know what will happen? It will come here, right? And I'm calling main. Fine. So it will again go to main. It will execute and then call multiply. Then multiply will call main. So basically both are calling each other and it never ends, right? So let us see this. But again, it will take the inputs that many number of times. See, it is again and again asking me only the inputs because I'm from the main, from the multiply, I'm calling the main function, right? So again, each function is calling one another. Got the idea? Yeah. Yeah. Tell me. Yes, yes, yes. Exactly. If you take exactly. In that case, we have an option, right? So for example, function multiply is there, right? So for example, in this multiply function, what I can do is just like the subtract function, I can do like this. In the end, I can just the subtraction, okay, the multiplication of I and j is, because the limitation with C is that you can only return one value. You cannot return multiple values. For example, if you have a calculator program and you just write one function, and that function basically does addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, right? So basically, you will have four values: add, subtract, division, multiplication. But you cannot return all four to the main. You can return only one value. So what you can do, you can print those three values in the function and return one value, right? So for example, in this case, what will I do? I will print the multiplication in the function itself, and then I can even return 0 here, right? So let us see the execution when I'm running the code. Two numbers to multiply, 5 into 3. So see the multiplication of I and j, this printf I had written in the function definition. This is 15, right? And the subtraction is also 2. Now you will say why this 0 is coming here. The result of multiplication is 0. Why? Because we returned 0 here. So this return basically gets pasted into this place, and hence the result came as 0. So not necessarily that if you are returning using a void of integer or a float or anything, you need to actually return the value. But when you're returning something, it makes sense to return something, right? But remember, one flaw in C is that you cannot return multiple data types, right? So this statement is also not exactly true that you cannot return multiple data types, because when we do pointers, we can return multiple data types in an indirect way, right? So for example, C does not support something like, return I comma j, right? Let us say you did two operations here. So C does not support something like, result 1 and result 2. Suppose, just hypothetically assume these are two variables. So it will not happen that I will go to result 1 and j will go to result 2. Nothing of that sort. You can only return one value in C, right? Python, you can return multiple values very easily. It takes it like a respectively manner, right? What happened if we write, yeah, tell. Yeah, I think this is a very good doubt. Yeah, you can do that. So what you can do is like, if you write this statement like this, let me comment this out, and you can write it here also, right? The result of the multiplication is percent %d, and then what do? You call the multiply function directly here. So this will also display the correct answer. So see 5 comma 3. So you can see the result of multiplication is 15. Usually programmers actually prefer this approach only, right? Right? It will actually prefer this approach. You directly define percent %d and then you directly call the function from here itself. So the function when gets executed will return back the value, and then you are basically done with this, right? So it was a good doubt. Appreciate. So keeping it to the original code so that you can try out various things. Or let me do one thing, I will just, because it's a very good doubt asked, I will just keep another variant also so that you can try it out in your dropbox, right? So 5 and 3, 15, 15 and 2, right? Because I'm displaying the printf twice. So functions 2. So we have some 4 minutes left. So what we can do here is, so you can see here what I'm doing. Let me just run the code. 5. The number after adding 2 is 7. Square is 25. Cube is 125. Answers are coming correct. So what happens now? I took an input and then I'm calling the square function. So as I said, when the function is called, the execution of main is paused, not stopped. It is paused for some time. Square function is here. So square function is 5. After this 5, basically what happens, this 5 will be copied to 5. Now you can see I'm defining a float p whose value I'm keeping x into x. So basically what will happen here, this will become 5 into 5. So which is equal to 25. Right? It will be a single equal to 5 into 5 is equal to 25. Now what is happening? Add of 2. So now you can see from another function square fun, I am calling another function. Alright. So now here what happens is like, and this is totally allowed. If you see the multiply example, we could call the main from the multiply example, right? We could call the main from multiply example. Fine. Now what is happening? I am calling the function add to. So what will add to do? Add to basically comes to this position. And what was the value of x? X was 5. So again I am passing this as 5. So this 5 basically gets passed to x, and the number after adding 2 is x plus 2, which is 5 plus 2, which is 7. Why 7.00? Because I had used percentage f. Fine. So now you could see from a function which was square fun, I am calling another function which is add to. I can call as many functions from another functions, right? So I can call all the functions. Like technically you do not call the same function from itself because it will be an infinite loop. So if you have k functions defined, you can call k minus 1 functions from itself. K minus 2 if I exclude main also, right? So it will come to add 2 comes here, and hence you can see this printf will be printed first, right? The number after adding 2 is 7. Now as I told, when the function completes execution, it returns to the place where it was called. It returns to the place where it was called. So where it was called? It was called in line number 36. Now you can see this was a void function, so no return statement. So I return to line number 36. Then what I do? Return p. What was the value of p? P was 25. Now this float function, square function, is completing execution where it will return to the place where it was called. Where it was called, line number 38 completes the execution. It was called in this place. So now squared value has a value 25. Now again I'm calling the cube function. So cube function, it will search where it is. So what is cube doing? Cube is cubing it, multiplying by 3 times. So it will return 5 into 5 into 5, which is 125, right? And now this 125 will return to this place. So as of now I have not displayed anything. I have just captured the values. And now I am displaying square of the given number. Input is squared value. So square of 5 is 25. Square of cube of 5 is 125. So this example was basically to tell you that how can the function execution calls take place, right? You can call one function from another function. It returns to the place where it was called. Yeah, some of their are saying that what happens if you have no memory left in RAM. So there are two things these days. Initially, what happens nowadays, compilers are intelligent enough. So internally, what they do, for example, for these queries, right? Somebody is asking in the chat, "Will my computer halt and all?" So these days, the compilers have become intelligent. So if by mistake you are calling a function from itself, leading to recursion and an infinite loop, they keep an upper limit so that, and that upper limit is very high and it is compiler dependent and the version dependent. They basically say that beyond this particular point, I will automatically stop the execution of the code. Right. So basically, your computer would never halt. That is the answer for the queries. Okay, guys, it's 11:57. I think you need to sign into the next class. So thank you for watching, and I will upload the videos today. Fine. I hope you have installed Dropbox. I had sent the instructions yesterday, and you are able to see the codes now.